Okay, here we are. We're on chapter 6. It's the final chapter in part 1. Part 1 is called the Old Buccaneer, right? Now we're in chapter 6, which is called the Captain's Papers. Whenever you're making your prediction in the previous chapter, it's always okay to look ahead to the next chapter and find out what it's called so you can make that prediction. So when you look at something like the Captain's Papers, what do you think that might be about? What papers? So, are we talking about the captain that called himself captain, but we find out his name is Billy Bones? He was actually the first mate. Or are we talking about Captain Flint, the captain that is mentioned as maybe the guy that they all worked for, the crew that came and ransacked the Admiral Benbow, and that they were Flint's crew, and that Billy Bones was Flint's first mate? So is that the captain we're talking about? I don't know. All right. So when we last left our narrator, Jim, he had just experienced seeing pirates just destroy his house while his mom was passed out in a ditch. And then he watched the blind man Pew get run over by the revenue officers and killed. You know, that's like his third death this week. It's been a tough time. And then he's got this little packet, this oilskin packet. The figures might be what they were after because they weren't happy with the money. They wanted whatever else was missing, and that's the only thing, right? And he didn't give it to the revenue officer, and the revenue officer is now going to take him to Dr. Livesey because that's the person that Jim wants to give this packet to. And so that's where we are right now. He is on his way with the officers with the packet that he got out of Billy Bones's sea chest. Okay. We rode hard all the way till we drew up before Dr. Livesey's door. The house was all dark to the front. Mr. Nance told me to jump down and knock, and Dogger gave me a stirrup to descend by. The door was opened almost at once by the maid. "Is Dr. Livesey in?" I asked. "No," she said. He had come home in the afternoon, but had gone up to the hall to dine and pass the evening with the Squire. "So there we go, boys," said Mr. Nance. This time, as the distance was short, I did not mount, but ran with Dogger's stirrup leather to the lodge gates and up the long, leafless, moonlit avenue to where the white line of the hall buildings looked on either hand on great old gardens. Here, Mr. Nance dismounted, and taking me along with him, was admitted at a word into the house. So they're going to the Squire's house, which is a big fancy manor house, okay? The servant led us down a matted passage and showed us at the end into a great library, all lined with bookcases and busts upon the top of them, where the Squire and Dr. Livesey sat, pipe in hand, on either side of a bright fire. I had never seen the Squire so near at hand. He was a tall man, over 6 feet high, and broad in proportion, and he had a bluff, rough and ready face, all roughened and reddened and lined in his long travels. His eyebrows were very black and moved readily, and this gave him a look of some temper, not bad, you would say, but quick and high. "Come in, Mr. Nance," says he, very stately and condescending. "Good evening, Nance," says the doctor with a nod, "and good evening to you, friend Jim. What good wind brings you here?" The supervisor, it's Mr. Nance, right, stood up straight and stiff and told his story like a lesson, and you should have seen how the two gentlemen leaned forward and looked at each other and forgot to smoke in their surprise and interest. When they heard how my mother went back to the inn, Dr. Livesey fairly slapped his thigh, and the Squire cried, "Bravo!" and broke his long pipe against the grate. Long before it was done, Mr. Trelawney, that you will remember was the Squire's name, had got up from his seat and was striding about the room, and the doctor, as if to hear the better, had taken off his powdered wig and sat there looking very strange indeed, with his own close-cropped black poll. There's a lot that needs to be explained right here, because it doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't know some of these old ideas, okay? So first of all, they get there and they meet the Squire, and he's a kind of a big guy, over 6 feet tall, broad, and he looks rough and ready. He's a hunter, and he's a adventurer kind of guy, and he seems like he's got like a lot of attitude. you know, maybe not a bad attitude, but a lot of it, right? And they're sitting there on either side of a fire and they're smoking pipes. Remember, that's how they smoked tobacco back in the day. And the kinds of pipes that they used back then were made out of clay, and they were long. They were like long white clay pipes, and they were easy to break. As a matter of fact, they were fairly disposable. And so when he breaks his pipe, it's not like, it wasn't that fancy. It was just a little clay pipe thing that they used to use. And so the doctor, it talks about his wig again. He takes his wig off, and it's contrast to his it calls it close cropped black poll. Close cropped, so like a crew cut, kind of shaved head kind of thing. And he has got black hair underneath his powdered wig, like, you know, like a George Washington wig. And poll is a word that means head. Okay, so his head is just, he's got short black hair underneath that wig. Okay, but he takes, okay, so these guys are listening to the story of what happened, and they're like, what? You're kidding, that's what happened? Takes his wig off, he's all amazed. The other guy breaks his pipe. You know, it's all very exciting to them, okay? At last, Mr. Nance finished the story. Mr. Nance, said the squire, you are a very noble fellow. And as for writing down that black, atrocious miscreant, I regard it as an act of virtue, sir, like stamping on a cockroach. This lad Hawkins is a trump, I perceive. Hawkins, will you ring that bell? Mr. Nance must have some ale. And so, Jim, said the doctor, you have the thing that they were after, have you? Here it is, sir, said I, and I gave him the oilskin packet. The doctor looked it all over, as if his fingers were itching to open it. But instead of doing that, he put it quietly in the pocket of his coat. Squire, said he, when Nance has had his ale, he must, of course, be off on his Majesty's service. But I mean to keep Jim Hawkins here to sleep at my house, and with your permission, I propose we should have up the cold pie and let him sup. As you will, Livesey, said the squire. Hawkins has earned better than cold pie. So a big pigeon pie was brought in and put on a side table, and I made a hearty supper, for I was as hungry as a hawk, while Mr. Nance was further complimented and at last dismissed. If you think about it, I don't think Jim had time for dinner, and so now he gets like a fancy dinner at the squire's house. Pigeon pie. Right? And now, Squire, said the doctor. And now, Livesey, said the squire in the same breath. They were so excited. Okay, so when Jim said, oh, here it is, Dr. Livesey's like, takes it out, he's like, and then he puts it in a pocket, and then they get rid of the other guy, Officer Nance. And they're like, oh, now's the time. Why are they so excited? Okay. One at a time, laughed Dr. Livesey. You have heard of this Flint, I suppose? Heard of him, cried the squire. Heard of him, you say? He was the bloodthirstiest buccaneer that sailed. Blackbeard was a child to Flint. The Spaniards were so prodigiously afraid of him that, I tell you, sir, I was sometimes proud he was an Englishman. I've seen his topsails with these eyes off Trinidad, and the cowardly son of a rum puncheon that I sailed with put back, sir, into port of Spain. So what he's saying there is like, he was a terrible pirate that everybody was afraid of. He was even proud that he was also an Englishman, because he was like, oh, he's the greatest pirate ever. And he said, I even saw his ship, but the guy that was like guiding, like our captain, was like so afraid of him that we had to go back to port because he was afraid of that pirate ship. Okay. Well, I've heard of him myself in England, said the doctor, but the point is, had he money? That we shall soon know. But had he money? Money, cried the squire. Have you, sorry about that, missed my spot, so I'm going to back up just a little bit. So, well, I've heard of him myself in England, said the doctor. But the point is, had he money? Money, cried the squire. Have you heard the story? What were these villains after but money? What do they care for but money? For what would they risk their rascal carcasses but money? Whew, that we shall soon know, replied the doctor. But you are so confoundedly hot-headed and exclamatory that I cannot get a word in. What I want to know is this. Supposing that I have here in my pocket some clue to where Flint buried his treasure, will that treasure amount to much? Amount, sir, cried the squire. It will amount to this if we have the clue that you talk about. I fit out a ship in Bristol dock and take you and Hawkins here along, and I'll have that treasure if I search a year. Very well, said the doctor. Now then, if Jim is agreeable, we'll open the packet. And he laid it before him on the table. The bundle was sewn together, and the doctor had to get out his instrument case and cut the stitches with his medical scissors. It contained two things, a book and a sealed paper. First of all, we'll try the book, observed the doctor. The squire and I were both peering over his shoulder as he opened it, for Dr. Livesey had kindly motioned me to come round from the side table where I had been eating to enjoy the sport of the search. On the first page, there were only some scraps of writing, such as a man with a pen in his hand might make for idleness or practice. One was the same as the tattoo mark, Billy Bones his fancy. Then there was Mr. W. Bones, mate. No more rum. Off Palm Key he got it, with two T's, weird, and some other snatches, mostly single words and unintelligible. I cannot help wondering who it was that had got it, and what it was that he got. The knife in his back is like as not. Not much instruction there, said Livesey as he passed on. The next 10 or 12 pages were filled with a curious series of entries. There was a date at one end of the line, and at the other a sum of money, as in common account books. But instead of explanatory writing, only a varying number of crosses between the two. On the 12th of June, 1745, for instance, a sum of 70 pounds had plainly become due to someone, and there was nothing but 6 crosses to explain the cause. In a few cases, to be sure, the name of a place would be added, as off Caracas, or a mere entry of latitude and longitude, as 62 degrees, 17. I'm really bad at reading latitude and longitude, so this is usually where I get kids to ask Mr. Taylor for instruction on how to read latitude and longitude, since he's their geography teacher. So do that. Okay. Anyway, there's some latitude and longitude. The record lasted over nearly 20 years, the amount of the separate entries growing larger as time went on, and at the end, a grand total had been made out after 5 or 6 wrong additions, and these words appended. Bones, his pile. Can't make head or tails of this, said Dr. Livesey. The thing is as clear as noonday, cried the squire. This is the Black-Hearted Hound's account book. These crosses stand for the names of ships or towns that they sank or plundered. The sums are the scoundrel's share, and where he feared an ambiguity, you see he added something clearer. Off Caracas. Now, you see, here was some unhappy vessel, boarded off that coast. God help the poor souls that manned her. Coral, long ago. Right, said the doctor. See what it is to be a traveler. Right, and the amounts increase, you see, as he rose in rank. Right. So, okay, there's little else in the volume, but a few bearings of places noted in the blank leaves towards the end, and a table for reducing French, English, and Spanish monies to a common value. Thrifty man, cried the doctor. He wasn't the one to be cheated. Okay, so this is Billy Bones's account book. If this is, these are the boats we took, and here, this is the money I was owed. Here's another one that we took. Here's the money I was owed all the way down. Okay. And now, said the squire, for the other. The paper had been sealed in several places with a thimble by way of seal. The very thimble, perhaps, that I had found in the captain's pocket. Okay, so the way they sealed papers is they'd fold them and they would put melted wax, and then they'd stick like their ring, which would have a symbol on it, or a stamp that would have a symbol on it so you could tell who was doing that. This has been sealed like with wax, but instead of using something like that, they used a thimble because, thimbles, they're going to protect your finger from the hot wax, right? And still push an imprint into it. So it's kind of an interesting thing to do, okay? So it's been sealed with a thimble, the very thimble perhaps that I found in the captain's pocket. The doctor opened the seals with great care, and there fell out the map of an island, with latitude and longitude, soundings, names of hills and bays and inlets, and every particular that would be needed to bring a ship to a safe anchorage upon its shores. It was about 9 miles long and 5 across, shaped, you might say, like a fat dragon standing up, and had 2 fine landlocked harbors and a hill in the center part marked the Spyglass. There were several additions of a later date, but above all, 3 crosses of red ink, 2 on the north part of the island, 1 in the southwest, and beside this last, in the same red ink, and in a small, neat hand, very different from the captain's tawdry characters, these words: bulk of treasure here. Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the north of north-northeast, Skeleton Island, east-southeast, and by east, 10 feet. The bar silver is in the north cache. You can find it by the trend of the east hummock, 10 fathoms south of the black crag with the face on it. The arms are easy found in the sand hill, north point of North Inlet Cape, bearing east and a quarter north. J.F. Okay, when you see all that in the italics, all of that was what was written on the thing they were reading. Okay, sets it apart from what book is. This is the writing within the writing. Okay, that's what the italics are. Signed J.F. That was all, but brief as it was, and to me incomprehensible, it filled the Squire and Dr. Livesey with delight. Livesey, said the Squire, you will give up that wretched practice at once. Tomorrow I start for Bristol. In 3 weeks' time, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days, we'll have the best ship, sir, and the choicest crew in England. Hawkins shall come as cabin boy. You'll make a famous cabin boy, Hawkins. You, Livesey, as our ship's doctor. I am admiral. We'll take Redruth, Joyce, and Hunter. We'll have favorable winds, a quick passage, and not the least difficulty in finding the spot. And money to eat, to roll in, to play duck and drake with ever after. Trelawney, said the doctor, I'll go with you, and I'll go bail for it. So will Jim, and be a credit to the undertaking. There's only one man I'm afraid of. And who's that? Cried the Squire. Name the dog, sir. You, replied the doctor, for you cannot hold your tongue. We are not the only men who know of this paper. These fellows who attacked the inn tonight, bold, desperate blades for sure, and the rest who stayed aboard that lugger and more, I dare say, not far off, are, one and all, through thick and thin, bound that they'll get that money. We must none of us go alone till we get to sea. Jim and I shall stick together in the meanwhile. You'll take Joyce and Hunter when you ride to Bristol, and from first to last, not one of us must breathe a word of what we've found. Livesey, returned the Squire, you are always in the right of it. I'll be as silent as a grave. Okay. So you have to summarize what happened in this chapter, and you've got Jim delivering this packet to the Squire and Dr. Livesey. You've met a new character, Squire Trelawney. He's important. As a matter of fact, he's mentioned in the very beginning. If you go back to the very beginning of the story, Jim talks about how Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the rest of the gentlemen having asked me to write down the whole particulars about Treasure Island. Okay? When he says that, he's talking about like looking back on things. So these people all, just so that you know, make it to the end of the story, and they're saying, Jim, you need to tell this story. So Squire Trelawney is a very important character, obviously. So we just met him, and they get the packet, and they look inside it. They find the account book, and they find a map of an island, and that island seems to be a treasure map. Pretty excited. And the Squire's like, I'm going to get us a boat, and we're going to go, and you're going to be the ship's doctor, and you're going to be the cabin boy. We're going to have so much fun. We're going to get so much money. And the doctor's like, settle down. The only person I'm worried about is you. You can't talk about this. This has to be a secret. There's a bunch of other people who know that this exists, and they're looking for it. We have to be careful. So now you're filling it out. Summarize it. What's the author up to? Analyze that. What's going on here? This really is a setup. Like, now we know what's going to happen. It's called Treasure Island for a reason, right? Yeah. So here we are. We've had the whole first section is all about how they get the map. And they have a map. So what are they going to do with it? All right? Big predictions there. And so what do you wonder about? What was difficult? fill those things out. You've also got the piece where what's the best thing about this? Okay. Did you learn anything in this that was interesting to you? And on the back, list 3 characters. And this is pretty obvious. You got Jim, the doctor, and the Squire for this one. Nance was there for a little bit, but not as important as the other 3. Then you need to have 3 words that you define and a picture that you draw. What's the picture going to be? Is it going to be the map? Is it going to be the guy sitting by the fire? Is it going to be the pigeon pie? And here's the thing. You need to think about what's important and what's going to really make you think about this chapter. And that's what you draw. Okay. So that concludes part 1, chapters 1 through 6, and our first summary packet or notes for Treasure Island, our first set. There's the front. Okay. And when I see you again, we're going to be starting our part 2 on chapter 7. Okay. Can't wait.